Okay, starting today, right? We took notes yesterday. We're starting a new page. Brand new. We're keeping the notes that we did yesterday separate from the notes that we did today. Okay? Brand new notes. No, or I should say brand new paper. In the upper right hand corner, first and last name, hour, today's date, which as of right now is the 26th. That might change in a couple hours. I don't know. Who knows? All right. Anyways, Mason.
Mason, shut your dumb ass.
Okay.
I'm smarter than you, boy. What?
No, we're not going to create an essential question for today because the same standards that we talked about yesterday. We're still going to be going through identifying steering and suspension components and configurations. We're just going to further that along a little bit more today. Okay. So your essential question may get answered depending on what we can get through. Okay. So did we talk about spring rate yesterday? Yeah? Okay. So just kind of a quick overlap from yesterday to today. Spring rate is a vocabulary term that we use to identify a measurement of our spring. Namely, it's the load that is necessary to add to that spring to deflect it by 1 inch. So in this case, it's a coil spring that I can put in a tool, and I can literally compress it.
Oh, trust me, I'll give him one. He tests it.
Who needs one?
Me.
There you go.
Thank you.
It's the amount of weight that we need, or I should say not weight, the load necessary to deflect that coil spring by 1 inch. Okay? How strong do you need to be to push that down by 1 inch? Okay, it's going to be some poundage, right? And different rates or different springs are going to have different spring rates. Again, vehicles weigh thousands of pounds. So if you divide up the weight of the vehicle and all the load that the suspension system has to carry, the sprung weight, you divide it out by 4, that's going to roughly give you an idea of the static spring rate of how much that spring has to carry. And again, that's going to be deflecting depend on the weight of the vehicle. So it's not uncommon to maybe have 4, 5, 6, 700 pounds to deflect this spring by 1 inch. Okay, they're very stiff springs. But when you think about driving down the road, right, not only do you have to support that weight, but it's also a dynamic spring rate, meaning that this load that's going to be enacting on the springs in the various different parts of the car is going to change. As I'm going around a corner, I'm going to load up the outside springs more so than I am the inside springs. Okay, when I'm going over tough terrain, my tires and suspension system are going to oscillate back and forth. It's going to compress, store that energy, and extend that back out to keep the tires on the ground. So this is not just a one-size-fits-all 800 pounds per 1 inch. Okay, it's going to change. And again, there's variations in our springs design that could give us different dynamics of how the suspension system interacts and actually performs. Yes?
Can you show us the active suspension thing?
Probably not today.
Not today.
Once we get through some of this. Because when you see that, I want you to understand what's going on.
All right.
Okay? It's not just simply ooh, this is cool. I need you to be like, okay, this is how they're able to achieve that technology and why we haven't used it in the future here. Okay? All right. Again, more terms here. These terms are going to get a little wonky. Some of this stuff you probably never heard of. Jounce. Jounce. Not to be mistaken for bounce. It's not the same thing. Emerson, put the phone away. Jounce. What is the definition of jounce? It is the term used to describe a spring compressing as a tire and wheel moves upward. Please understand, because there's a variety of different types of springs that I could have incorporated into my suspension system, this quote-unquote compression may look different. Again, let's say I have a torsion bar. It's not a compression like a coil spring. It's a torsion. Okay, it's a twisting force. But regardless, jounce is occurring when the tire and suspension system is moving upwards. Okay, and that spring is compressing, or it's gaining energy from that suspension system. Okay, jounce. Just to be abundantly clear, there is going to be a test question on jounce, and it's going to be hilarious because one of the selections is bounce, and I'm always usually going to get about 25% of students selecting bounce, not jounce. So we'll see how much of you guys can remember that for the test. Jounce is the term. It's not bounce. All right, if jounce is when the spring is compressing as the tire is moving out, what's the term that we're going to use when the tire is going back down and the spring is essentially unloading its energy that it's
Rebound.
gaining? Yeah, right? Spoiler alert, it's already on the screen. Rebound. Rebound is used to describe a spring extending as a tire and wheel moves downward. Okay, vocab words. You got to know this term, these terms. These are industry terms. These aren't things that I just pulled out of a hat and say this is what we're going to call it. Okay, regardless of what auto technician you talk to, what vehicle manufacturer, jounce and rebound. You need to know these terms. You have to have them memorized.
Yes, you can make it to Chick-fil-A and back during lunch.
This ADD moment brought to you by Taco Bell.
No, by Chick-fil-A.
Oh, I didn't know they were paying you.
I don't know if you can make it.
That's the most random question I've received this morning.
Well, it's like 20 minutes probably from here. I feel like it's in Europe.
All right, jounce and rebound. Jounce and rebound. The spring compressing and extending. And we know what's being extended and compressed based off of the wheel movement, up and down. And if we kind of work our way back into yesterday's information, right? The more weight my chassis is, the more sprung weight I have, the more energy it's going to take from that road to be able to compress that spring and then have that energy transferred into the vehicle to move the vehicle. Okay? The faster my spring and my suspension system can articulate, the lighter it is, the lighter my unsprung weight is, right? The less energy is going to require to maneuver that, which means it's going to be able to stay on the road more. That's the goal. Okay, we talked about springs. Springs is a critical part of our suspension system that we need to have in order to absorb and get rid of energy that's coming in through the vehicle, whether it's through the road, whatever it may end up being. Okay? It is what's going to keep the chassis up and the tires down on the ground. The problem with springs is that they're very bad at dissipating their energy in a short period of time. Well, I wouldn't say that. Dissipating the energy because they like to jounce and rebound quite frequently, right? If everyone's ever seen a spring before, I can compress that spring. When I let it go, it likes to extend beyond what it's capable of, and then it comes back and compresses, and it reverberates, right? And if you've ever been in a vehicle with a bad suspension system, you know immediately what this feels like. Because you're driving down the road, you hit a pothole, you hit a bump, right? And all of a sudden, oh, my car is doing one of these. Like, what is going on? Right? Feels like you're kind of going and you're on a trampoline. Well, why is that? That's because your springs are doing exactly what it's doing. It's intending, right? It's going back and forth. We don't want that because as our vehicle is driving down the road, if that oscillation is happening in the suspension system, it's very difficult to control our vehicle. It's unpredictable. Okay, I can turn left and all of a sudden, oh my goodness, oh, the tires can't stay on the ground. The tires are gonna come off up and down. Okay, then we're gonna have some bad issues. So what we actually have to do is, in combination with our spring, we have to add some way to dampen or slow down the jounce and rebound energy that the spring is absorbing. Okay? So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to attach a dampener to dampen the spring energy, to slow it down. Also known as a shock absorber. Okay? This is a tool that it's going to work with the spring. It's going to extend and compress, just like with our spring, but it's going to basically be a resistance to that. Okay? So one of the ways you can tell if your shock absorber is not functioning properly is a suspension system that's going to cause excessive bouncing. That means your shock absorber is bad. It needs to be replaced. Okay? So, first off, what is a shock absorber and what is its purpose? Two things that we're highlighting here. Okay? So the shock absorber dampens or slows the spring motion during jounce and rebound. Okay, that's its purpose. That's what it's there for.
Crazy.
It is crazy. And again, you can get a variety of different types of shock absorbers depending on your application. Hey, I've only got a Toyota Prius. I don't need a hardcore shock absorber. Right? Because there's not a lot of weight there to begin with, relatively speaking, right? However, if I'm going out and I got a monster truck and I'm going over huge jumps, as I'm landing, I need to be able to obviously cushion that landing with my spring, but that shock absorber needs to be able to collapse and extend at much greater speeds while still maintaining that spring rate that I need.
How about them Ford Raptors?
Okay.
The big sandy ones.
So obviously I'm not going to take a monster truck shock absorber and put it on my F-150, even though it might look cool, and I can tell people, hey, I got monster truck shock absorbers on this, and my suspension is totally off the chain, whatever you kids are saying these days, right?
Definitely not off the chain.
Yeah, that's probably like mid-2000s. I'm sorry, I'm dating myself.
You're old.
All right, so the question I have for you is, how does a shock absorber actually do this? How is it able to actually slow down the jounce and rebound of my spring? Okay, this is how most shock absorbers are going to actually function. Okay, so they're velocity sensitive, meaning they're speed sensitive. So small little iterations, right? If I'm going down a rough road, that shock absorber can move pretty rapidly in small successions.
What's going on?
Right? Because it's not moving very hardcore. However, all of a sudden, I go over a big pothole, boom, it's going to slow down the faster it wants to go. Right? Oh, it's going to extend out really quick. Oh, it's slowing down. You know, it's compressing really fast, it's slowing down. But these little micro movements, it's not going to dampen as much. It's hydraulic dampening devices. Hydraulic, what is hydraulic? We know what pneumatic is, right? What's pneumatic?
Air.
Air. Okay, compressed air. We've got pneumatic hoses and stuff out in the shop that we can use to fill up our tires, but also run tools. Hydraulic is essentially, yeah, Chris.
Like something with water?
Yeah, basically, right? We don't use water, but it's fluids, right? It's a fluid. So typically hydraulic fluid is what we're going to have in here. Fluid displacement on both jounce and rebound. So you can see here I've got a GIF that's moving this. So the shock absorber is moving in and out. This is on the inside of this tube. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna draw on here, but it might cause this to stop. There it is. Okay, on the inside of here, I've got two parts. I've got a rod down here and I got a little piston. Okay, this piston is moving back and forth, reacting to the spring energy that's being absorbed. Okay, inside this piston are some holes. Right there, I got a hole. And on either side of this piston, I have hydraulic fluid. Okay, so I got hydraulic fluid down here and I got hydraulic fluid up here. As this piston is moving back and forth, it's forcing that hydraulic fluid through this hole back and forth. And we can actually relegate, or not relegate, but measure the amount of hydraulic fluid that we can push through that hole at any given point in time with the speed. Okay, so that's what's going to restrict that hydraulic fluid from moving back and forth. Okay, let me go ahead and end this so you can kind of see this. You can kind of see this. It looks like fireworks, but it's basically that's the movement of the hydraulic fluid as it's the piston in that shock absorber is moving up and down.
Crazy.
That is what allows that shock absorber to slow down, because we're literally taking and forcing that fluid through that small opening. It's restricting the movement. Obviously, if I had bigger holes in that piston, the more hydraulic fluid can get through there, the less dampening I'm going to get on my spring. The smaller the holes, the harder it is going to take, or the more energy it is going to be able to get that hydraulic fluid through that, which means that it's going to dampen at a greater rate. Okay, it's going to be a much stiffer suspension system. Okay. Now the fun part about this is you can get pretty wild on this. You can actually get shock absorbers or dampeners that you can actually adjust on the outside, saying, hey, you know, when I'm going on the road, I'm going to turn that down. I want a stiffer suspension system. Okay, or I can crank that up and I can have a looser suspension system. So all of a sudden, right, I can go through turns and corners probably a little differently. Right? Race cars, you can actually do this manually as you're driving the car. Hey, I'm going around this corner, I need it more stiffer. Oh, hey, I'm going around this corner, I need it looser. You can electronically control the effect of this damper. Now that's beyond our capability of everything, but understand that this fluid displacement back and forth is also going to generate heat. All right. Over a period of time, these shock absorbers, the seals that hold this hydraulic fluid in, are going to break, are going to crack, it's going to leak. So one of the things that you can look for when you inspect suspension systems, which is something you're going to have to do, is you want to take a look at the condition of the outside of that shock absorber. If it looks like it's wet and nothing else around it is wet, right? It's not like you just drove through a puddle, and it looks like it's leaking hydraulic fluid, it's telling you that the seals and whatnot on this shock absorber have been damaged to the point where it needs to be replaced. Okay? Kind of fun. Now, how we mount the shock absorber on our suspension system is geometrically important. We don't just simply put it up there with a nut and a bolt and have it and it's good to go. Okay? Just like our wheel alignment, there are certain angles at which this needs to be mounted to the chassis and to our suspension system in order to be most effective. Now, in most cases, we want that shock absorber to be perpendicular to the force that's pushing on it. So if my spring is straight up and down, I want my shock absorber straight up and down. That's going to provide the greatest amount of dampening force applied to that spring. Unfortunately, most times we don't have enough room in our wheel well or around our suspension system to accommodate that. Okay, so typically speaking, we're also going to want to put an angle on that to a certain extent that will still allow that shock absorber to do its job effectively, dampening the spring, slowing it down, but also taking account for other types of forces that are enacting on our suspension system, such as acceleration and braking. We'll get more into that later on in the presentation, but if you aren't aware, when I accelerate, right, my back two wheels are going to receive more weight because of physics. An object in motion wants to stay in motion, an object at rest wants to stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. If I'm at a stop sign, my vehicle is stopped. I hit the accelerator, I'm going to want to, right, the vehicles want to start going forward, But the back end is, all that weight is going to get transferred to the back end. I'm going to squat down, right? My rear tires, my rear suspension system is going to receive a lot more dynamic load. Okay, the opposite of that is also true when I am braking. When I'm braking, my front of my vehicle is going to dive forward. There's going to be more weight transferred to the front of my suspension system. So that shock absorber has to accommodate for those braking and accelerating forces. Question? No?
Is that why some fast cars do wheelies?
Yes, that's why some cars do wheelies.
Oh, my God.
Okay, because they've created so much torque force that they're able to actually lift up their front end because it's all getting transferred back. That's why if you've ever seen like motorcycles, when they hit the brakes, what happens to the back end?
We do stop use.
Right? They're balancing up on their front tires because all their weight got transferred to the front and they're balancing it on that. So yes, that's kind of the same principle. Okay, because our shock absorber is full of hydraulic fluid, and we kind of touched base on this back in the day when we talked about our lubrication systems. If I aerate that fluid, if I aerate oil, Easton, stop.
Aerate oil.
Aeration, all that means is we're adding air into that fluid. Bubbles. Tiny bubbles. Again, I'm dating myself a little bit here. Aerated oil is compressible. It can cause a skip and shock operation. Gas charged shocks contain a nitrogen gas which is pressurized to about 350 psi. That's a lot. To eliminate foaming and aeration of the oil. Okay, the nitrogen chamber in a gas charged shock may be pressurized to 25 times atmospheric pressure. This is something you don't want to typically mess with, by the way. You have to be cautious on if you are actually going in and replacing stuff. So think about this. If I had just a cup of milk, right, a glass of milk, go into the refrigerator, pour myself a nice cold cup of milk, right? I go, man, that looks really good. I'm gonna take a spoon or something, spatula, maybe you got one of those like little frother things, right? You're gonna put it in there, you're gonna hit the button, or you're gonna kind of start churning it back and forth. What are you introducing into the milk? Air. You're going to start getting aeration of the milk, bubbles in the milk. Okay, then all of a sudden you go to drink your milk and you're like, oh man, that was all foam. Right?
Do you bubble your milk?
No, I don't bubble. I don't drink milk. Okay, but you get like a bunch of foam. You're like, man, I didn't get any good drink. It was all foam. Maybe you went out to like Starbucks or something and you were like, hey, I want some milk in my coffee. Right? And they put the foam on top, you go to drink and you go, oh man, that's not too bad. And all of a sudden you take a bigger swig and all of a sudden the hot coffee hits your lips and you're like, ow!
Or a beer. What's beer?
Talking about coffee here, basically.
Sorry.
Anyways, that same principle, how that milk or coffee got foamed, is the same principle we want to avoid in our shock absorber. So how do we do that? And you have to keep in mind, this shock absorber, this piston, is moving in and out through hydraulic fluid, just like how you would froth your milk or coffee. So what we end up doing is actually pressurizing that hydraulic fluid with nitrogen gas, and because we pressurize it, it's not going to mix in with that fluid. So it doesn't aerate, even though that piston is basically churning up and mixing in that hydraulic fluid.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. All right, again, understanding what a shock absorber is, how it works, and what its job is going to do is going to help us understand what happens when it doesn't work properly. What happens when it breaks, when it wears out. What symptoms am I going to see on my car as I'm driving it? Okay, and there are quite a few symptoms. Now, one thing I need to emphasize here on this is that some of these symptoms are not exclusive to bad shock absorbers. Okay? You could have other issues on the vehicle other than just bad shock absorbers, right? You could have bad wheel alignment, you could have bad braking, you could have other issues with the suspension system. So this is not because we have steering and handling problems, it must be the shock absorbers. It could be something else. This is why you have to go in and inspect and start looking at the suspension system, looking at what could cause all of this, making your measurements, comparing it to what the manufacturer wants, and then make a diagnosis. Hey, it is the shock absorber because of this. Now you can definitively say, this is what the problem is, now I can go in and fix it. Okay, this is why people get paid a good amount of money, because not everyone is capable of having this skill to be able to do this. But anyways, if I'm driving down the road and I got steering and handling problems, one of the things I have to have on my checklist is check the shock absorber. That could lead to steering and handling problems. I could have braking that is not smooth, right? Excessive bouncing after stops. Again, if I'm doing tire inspections, if I have cupped wear patterns, you guys see how I have this cupped wear pattern?
That wheel alignment.
Okay, that's caused by bad suspension systems. Or I could have spring that is bottoming out. Maybe you're driving over a pothole and all of a sudden you hit it, and all of a sudden it goes kaboom, right? Because that spring literally compressed so much, it actually hit the bottom of it, right? Went all the way up, hit your jounce stoppers. Now, why are these symptoms that are caused by bad shock absorbers? Again, just kind of reviewing, bringing this back in. If I have bad shock absorbers, it means my spring is able to jounce and rebound at a much more rapid pace. And it's going to do that for a prolonged period of time after energy has been put into that spring. So, how is that going to cause steering and handling problems? Again, if I'm bouncing down the road like this, I got to always be doing this to my steering wheel to keep it straight on the road. Right? Steering and handling problems. Hard to control the vehicle because the spring is overly active, because it's not the spring's fault, spring's fine, it's the shock absorber. Hey, I'm braking that is not smooth. Again, as I'm adding that energy into my front suspension springs, as I'm slowing down, adds that, and all of a sudden, I'm slowing down, and it's kind of bouncing. It's doing one of these things, right? You're sitting there, you got like a lowrider. You're like, yeah, this is cool, man. Turn up the bass. Right? The problem is that's not what you want your car to be doing while you're trying to stop. Because again, that could cause the wheels to actually come off the ground. You lose traction, which means you're not braking as soon as you want to. So it takes a prolonged period of time for that. Again, cupped wear is found because the tire is not always on the ground. It's constantly moving up and down as the tire is rotating. And again, the spring bottoming out because we can add so much energy very quickly to that because the shock absorber is not working. Does that make sense? How we can say, okay, the shock absorber is bad because my spring is overly active? All right, based off of your glazed over eyes, I'm going to say yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ooh. What's that card doing?
Now,
There you go.
knowing this, if I know that if my shock absorber is bad and my spring is overly active, I can use that to my advantage to run a test. So this is the test, the standard test that you can perform on any vehicle to identify if your shock absorber is bad. You're going to literally get up to like a quarter panel or the fender of your vehicle, depending on which side of the vehicle or which point you're going to be testing, and you're literally going to take that and you're going to start pushing down on the car. You're going to be adding force into that spring. You're going to get kind of bouncing like a basketball as much as you can, right? And then all of a sudden you're going to let go. That vehicle should oscillate maybe once, twice, and then it should settle down. It should literally go boom, boom, boom. Stops. If your vehicle keeps bouncing up and down multiple times after you let go, right, that's telling you something. That spring is not being dampened. Your shock absorber is bad. Think about it this way too. If I, at 200 pounds, am able to put force into that suspension system
Imagine.
and all of a sudden I let go and it's still doing this thing, what's happening as you're driving down the road, and how you have a 3,000 to 4,000 pound vehicle adding much more force into that spring?
It's just gonna.
It's going to be even worse.
Boom, boom,
Okay.
boom, boom, boom.
It's a driving problem. So that's the bounce test. You need to know the name of the test, and you need to know how to perform the test, and you need to know what to look for in the test. Shocker strut should only oscillate about 2 cycles, and then it should settle down. This bounce test is not testing your spring. It is testing your ability of your dampener to dampen the spring. This is what we're testing. We're not testing the spring. Okay? But you're going to have an overly active spring if you have a bad shock absorber. Ooh, okay, we're going to stop here.
Yeah.
Okay, at this point in time, this is what we're going to do. Last 5 minutes of class. Open up the back side of your sheet notebook. Again, the goal is to go through the notes and the information that we just talked about today. Review it real quick. Come up with 3 questions. Something you are confused about. Something you don't understand. Something maybe you want to know more about. Who, what, why, when, where, how. Okay?